Barings was a small bank. It was the capital base was £250 million. By the end of 1994, I had £500 or £600 million with me. Sometime between 93 and 94, it gets to the stage that the bank's going to collapse on the back of this, and therefore there is going to be a prison sentence. But am I still, am I thinking about that? Not really. I was born in Watford, so I lived there all of my formative years, I suppose. I grew up on a council estate in Watford, so, early childhood memories, there probably aren't too many other than playing a lot of sport. I was always quite active, running, playing football, doing those sort of things. Was very good at school. I went to a very good senior school. At the age of 11, Parmeters, which is probably the leading school in Hertfordshire these days. It probably took kids from a more affluent area than the area that I lived in, so they always had a bit more money, better football boots and all that sort of stuff. So there was always aspiration, I suppose, to do better, but that was always grounding me from my mother as well, who was more academic than my father. But she always wanted us to do better, achieve more. So classic working class values, and I think that that was instilled in me from a very early age.
You said you were good at school. Were you good at maths?
Yeah, I used to be good at maths, I suppose is the answer to that question. No, I flew through maths. Where it fell apart was A-level. So I got an A at O-level. And there was a teacher that I kind of respected an awful lot. He was the deputy head of the school. He got sick, unfortunately. So when it came to doing the A-levels, he was absent a lot. So they used to have relief teachers coming in. And it was easy to dodge those and just go and mess around down the road whilst you were supposed to be in maths classes. So I very spectacularly failed my maths A-level, and I often joke that was the reason why banking was the career for me. Failed maths A-level, collapse in a bank, they got what they deserved, I suppose.
Well, tell me, how does a man who fails his maths A-level end up working in finance?
A bit too easily, unfortunately, I suppose is the answer. No, my aspirations at the time were to go to university. I think that was I don't think anybody in our side of the family had really been to university at that stage. I hadn't looked at any jobs, wasn't really interested in anything in particular. Had no idea about banking, working in the city, all that sort of stuff either. So it was all a bit new for me. Or a lot of people at my school were applying to Coutts and Company, which is the Queen's Bank, the royal family bank there. Very elite private bank at the time, still is today. So I thought I'd apply because everybody else was. There was no other reason other than that. And there were a very small number of us that were brought forward for interview. So I went up for an interview. Had another test whilst I was there, an English and maths test, so managed to pass that one. And then they offered me a job. So I was at Coutts for, I'd say, just a little over 2 years. Went for an interview at Morgan Stanley, the big American investment bank, so one of the bigger American investment banks. So mixture of jobs, started looking after bond settlements in Leadenhall Street, then parts of Morgan Stanley moved to the West End, so I was working in Tottenham Court Road and those sort of areas for a short period of time, but looking after futures and options. So that was the switch or the pivot into becoming more specialised around a particular field within the investment banks.
And in your best layman terms, what are futures and options?
It really is just trading in a product that has a 3, 6 or 9, 12-month horizon. So you're trying to predict where, or it's a market where they are predicting where the price of something is going to be in 3 months' time.
What year did you leave Morgan Stanley? And can you tell me a little bit about Barings Bank?
Yeah, so I left Morgan Stanley probably in 1989 or early 1990. Barings was Baring Brothers was a 233-year-old merchant bank. At the time of the demise, wasn't 233 years old there. I worked for a new part of the organisation which was called Barings Securities, so that was formed in 1985. I'd specialised in Japanese futures and options, so Nikkei 225 principally. And Barings were looking to grow in that particular area, and they headhunted me. So they came looking for me, somebody who had that experience of Japanese futures and options. You know, they were always renowned for paying big bonuses. I don't think I ever heard of somebody getting less than a year's salary for their bonus.
How much are we talking then?
At the time, when I was in Singapore, I was probably earning £50,000 a year, so you're talking £150,000. But we are talking 30 years ago, so you know it was a significant sum of money. You know, certainly during that time, I heard of one guy who came across with a guaranteed £2 million bonus.
How much pressure is there to perform, and how much of that is related to your salary?
There's always pressure to perform. You know, it's one of those things that I think people hide behind a little bit too much in the city. So, you know, I didn't really feel it. You know, for me, it was more personal pressure to perform than something that the bank were putting on me. I mean, you know, unfortunately, you do find that when a lot of people find themselves in a rogue trading situation, or you know, any other sort of scandal involving banking, you know, the regular thing that they blame is pressure to perform. And yeah, it just wasn't something that applied to me during that time. Certainly not something that I felt, and I'm not going to try and hide behind it.
Did you know what failure felt like at the time?
No, I'd never experienced failure. You know, I think that's one of the problems. You know, I'd always been successful. I always found things quite easy. Always did them quite quickly. You know, I was highly accurate, and was very good at my job. You know, it was probably my biggest fear. You know, as much as coming from that working class background and being instilled with that desire to do better, that was fed into me from an early age. You know, it was always about being as successful as I possibly could be, and failure just wasn't an option. Not that I really spoke about it, you know, but you're going back 30 years as well, where, you know, people didn't really talk about their fears or their problems, and certainly when you're in a very macho type of environment, as trading floors were 30 years ago, everybody's great at talking about success and celebrating success, but nobody talks about failure because it's a weakness. And if you build up that fear to such a massive degree, as I did during that period, you're going to do things that you're going to regret later on. And, you know, that's what this story is about more than anything. So I moved to Singapore in 1992. I think I got married in March of 1992. For me, it was perfect. It was, you know, Japanese futures and options, Nikkei 225. I volunteered and put my hand up to move and go there. And it was, you know, setting up the office, employing all of the people, upgrading the membership of the Singapore International Monetary Exchange, and then overseeing the trading floor environment as well. And you know, I think things probably moved a little bit quicker and a little bit more strangely than they were anticipated to do at that particular point. And, you know, very soon on, I'm in charge of the back office, I'm in charge of the front office, and, you know, there's some obvious flaws within that because, you know, I'm controlling the trading side of it where potentially the losses are being made, and the back office side of things, the settlements, the operations around the business, was always very much an afterthought. The focus was always on how much money are you making, how quickly can we make that money. You know, that was one of the issues.
Where did things go wrong? What did you do?
Well, things went wrong. The trading floor, the volumes on the trading floor exploded. You know, when we first moved out to Singapore, the Nikkei 225 was probably trading less than 2,000 contracts a day. The Japanese markets were falling, so all of the business shifted to Singapore. So it goes from trading 2,000 contracts a day to trading 20,000 contracts, so a tenfold increase. And it's not ready for it. You know, people-wise, it's not ready for it. System-wise, it's not ready for it. You know, it was going back to the days where everything was done on a piece of paper. So it's quite manual, the matching process. I'd write, you know, that I bought from you. You'd say that you sold to me. Those tickets would go off to two different areas on the trading floor. Your clerk would input it into your machine. My clerk would input it into mine, and hopefully they match. But we may disagree on quantity. We might disagree on price. We might disagree on the month that we've traded. That has to be reconciled, and you know, somebody has to give way, you or I, in order for there to be a trade. So half an hour is the time limit normally for that. But because the volume had increased tenfold, the machines weren't ready for this increase in volume, the number of trade tickets that were going in, so the systems would just shut down. And somebody from IT at the Singapore International Monetary Exchange would have to try and get them to work again. And so they were going a lot slower than they would normally. So rather than matching trades within half an hour, it was taking 12, 13 hours to match a trade. So you were still matching trades at 2 or 3 in the morning, which obviously, you know, increases the risk. And on one of these occasions, we realised that the trade between you and I, we don't agree, and we're not going to agree. So the trade is exposed, but because I've already told my client the trade is good, I've got to give the trade to the client, and now I have exposure to the market because you and I can't agree. The thing that you should do the very next morning is you cut that trade at the first available price, realise the loss, and then, you know, go up the chain of command in reporting what that loss is. And I went some of that way. I always used to be the most diligent employee. I'd be the first one in the office. I'd be the last one to leave. So I was in the office the next morning at 7, market opened at 8. Simon Jones was there, who was the head of the operations department. I went in to see Simon, told him that we had a position discrepancy that was an error. He wanted me to quantify it. I said it was about £10,000 or $10,000. And he told me to refer it to Andrew Bayliss. So Andrew was the head of trading in London. But then I've got this dilemma. Andrew's not going to be at his desk for another 6 or 7 hours because there's an 8-hour time, or 7 or 8 hour time difference with Singapore at the time. I suppose over that next 50 or so minutes until the market opens, you know, just going through that dilemma. Do I want to highlight this failure when I've got this opportunity that the market might get back to those sort of levels? And I took the wrong option, right? The market never went back to that level. So rather than it being £10,000, you know, by the end of the day, it's probably £40,000. I'm now more complicit in it. You know, I've probably caused 3/4 of what the loss is now, as opposed to where I should have closed it. So because I'm more complicit in it, you know, I start to make some even worse decisions over that period. In terms of why I did it, I'd seen so many people do it before, right? I'd seen a lot of trades going in error accounts for a short period of time, and then being resolved, sometimes with a small loss, sometimes with no loss, but no real retribution on the back of it. So, you know, putting it into an error account wasn't the big step that it should have been, but still, in terms of the trade that did go into that error account that wasn't matched, it probably couldn't have been much worse at that particular time based on what the market was doing.
Is this a 5/8 account?
Yeah.
Could you just expand on that a little bit? So how would you hide these discrepancies?
Well, because we don't agree on the trade has to go somewhere. So this would go into the Singapore error account. Where it really got stepped outside of those bounds is it became a trade that I held positions overnight. And those positions got bigger and bigger and bigger. So September 1992, the loss is £5 million. You know, so it's escalated quite significantly over that period. You know, the market's continuing to fall. I'm continuing to double down, looking for a recovery in the market, and it doesn't come. The position's getting bigger and bigger throughout that period. So the auditors come in. I asked London for $5 million. You know, I give a fairly stupid explanation about why I need it, because of volatility in the market and the exchange are looking for more margin. The treasurer in London, he swallows that quite easily, and he sends $5 million. But I passed the journal entry on the 30th of September. The money arrives on the 1st of October. So there's there's an accounting difference between the time I post the journal to credit the 5/8 account and the money arriving into the bank. So the auditors, who were Deloitte's at the time, they see this, but they, thankfully at that time, they put it down as a foreign exchange discrepancy. I say thankfully, I don't really mean that, because if they'd accounted for it correctly, that would have stopped me there, and I probably would have got another job in another bank somewhere and told not to blacken Barings' door again. And that enabled me to continue continue on over the next period. So again, losses increase, market's still going against me, it's getting worse and worse and worse. And sometime between September and March of 1993, the loss is up to $20 million. So you've got a fourfold increase in what the loss was in September, getting more out of control. People aren't looking at what I'm doing. And you're getting more confidence that you've got longer to try and turn it around, because this wasn't a case of trying to steal money or anything like that. I just wanted to correct it and get back to a position where I could get back on with the rest of my life.
Psychologically, losing 20 million is no easy thing. It must have been weighing on you. How was it to live with that? What is that guilt?
God.
Did your wife know as well?
No, nobody knew. I didn't speak to anybody about it, so it was literally just me. I think once or twice I phoned people in London and friends who weren't really from the city, and I tried to have conversations with them, but I still never got to the stage where I really blurted it out and gave the complete account of what was going on. It's tough. I think I used alcohol an awful lot during that period. I was delaying the realisation of my own failure, or postponing the realisation of my own failure, as much as I was postponing the realisation of the losses, because the two were permanently interconnected. I think the psychological dilemma is probably biggest at the beginning. In the beginning, you're expecting a knock on the door every single second of every single day. Every time the phone rings, you think that's it, your number's up. How are you going to get past that phone call? Because somebody surely is highlighting one of the discrepancies that exist at that time. Then you get auditors come in, right? That's a hurdle you're never going to overcome, because you've now got professional external source coming in to look at what you're doing. And then they don't find it, because they're not asking the right questions as well. So it is a Jekyll and Hyde type of environment, because only I know the reality of what's going on. Everybody else is buying into this success story that's kind of, being generated around you.
Was there ever a point while these numbers are getting higher and higher and higher that you thought, I've got to call this off now?
There were times that I would have loved to. Like I was being offered jobs left, right and centre, from all of the big organisations, because from the outside it looked like, I was having the time of my life. I've got massive position, reporting massive profits, and commanding the market in Singapore. But obviously I couldn't go anywhere, because it was going to leave a massive hole at Barings. And then, by March of 1993, the loss is at $20 million, and you get the most perfect expiry in the options market, and I've got £250,000 profit. So I've gone from a $20 million loss to a $250,000 profit. So you go home that weekend thinking, your life can start again. You're back to, the zero position, if you like. And
how did that feel?
Yeah, great, but it's very short-lived, right? It's literally one day, because you arrive back on Monday morning and you've got an operation that hasn't been working correctly for the previous 6 or 7 or 9 months. And it doesn't work. It doesn't miraculously start working on Monday morning just because you've got the loss back. So you've still got traders who are over trading. I'm trying to get more involved to try and solve that quicker, but get back into the same situation. You've now got confidence you solved it once. Very foolishly, you think you might be able to solve it again. I'm sure many people have been in that sort of situation. And it just gets worse and worse and bigger and bigger. I'm needing more and more money from London over this period. The Treasury Department are sending that out to me. Not without question, but with very little question. And over the period, like Barings was a small bank. It was the capital base was £250 million. By the end of 1994, I had £500 or £600 million with me in Singapore. Now Barings didn't have that money, so they were borrowing it. They were borrowing it from Barclays, they were borrowing it from Citibank.
Why did Barings send you all this money?
You'd have to ask them, not me. That's the question that should have been asked from the beginning. And it's very difficult to answer. But it was a whole systemic breakdown. And, the only explanation I can give you, just to try and answer your question, is that they all wanted to believe in the success, because that's what fed their bonuses as well.
What were you scared of would happen if you did put your hands up? Did you know what kind of prison sentence or charges you'd get?
No, not really. I mean, I think if you look at it chronologically, you know, $5 million loss or pound loss at the end of 1992, I would have just been given a slap on the wrist and told not to do it again. I'd seen people at Barings who'd lost 9-10 million overnight, didn't lose their job because they were fairly good at what they did. At the end of 1993, I'm going to lose my job. There's no doubt about it. Sometime between 93 and 94, it gets to the stage that, you know, the bank's going to collapse on the back of this, and therefore there is going to be a prison sentence. But am I still, you know, am I thinking about that? Not really. I'm still trying to survive, looking for that situation where I can resolve the problem, get back to zero. As I said, over that period up until the end of 1994, I needed a total of £500 million.
Tell me, how quickly did it accelerate from 500 million, and how big and bad did it get?
Well, at the end of 1994, I never expected to go back to Singapore. We came back to London. We had Christmas with family, so the 31st of December. One of the girls in the office phones me up and says, we've not done anything with the 5/8 account. So I've not made any attempt to conceal the loss. It's 7 billion yen. So I just told her to pass a one-sided journal entry, so to credit the 5/8 account. This is the most obvious, blatant attempt at concealing a loss as you can possibly make. But it gives me 2 or 3 days before it's going to be exposed, because you've got that New Year period. We've got auditors coming in. The audit period has now changed to December. So it was almost, and again, I hate cliches, but it was almost an attempt to be found out, if you like. So I was back home in London for another couple of days, had a flight back to Singapore, I think, on the 5th of January. And it was probably the most harrowing journey I've ever been on, you know, because I knew that when I arrived back in Singapore, I'm going to face, I've got this balance sheet that doesn't agree, and I'm going to face an absolute storm when I get there. And it's starting immediately. I get off the plane and they send over a settlements clerk from London to look at what's going on in Singapore, and eventually on the 23rd of February, it still took him about 2 or 3 weeks to find it, but he did a position reconciliation, and obviously there was a huge discrepancy, which was the position in my 5/8 account. And when you're confronted with it in black and white, there's no explanation. You know, you're out of excuses. It doesn't agree. It's not like 2 and 2 equals 5. This was 2 and 2 equals 1 million. You know, that's how bad the discrepancy was. So there's no way of explaining it away. And that happened on the 23rd of February, and that was the day that I fled Singapore.
How much was it for in total?
The total loss was that's attributed to it is £862 million. I think at the time it was about 1.2 billion US dollars. Didn't quite understand how calamitous it was going to be. So yeah, just went home, packed a bag. The only place we could fly to in the afternoon was Kota Kinabalu. We were staying in the Shangri-La, and on the Saturday, which was the 25th of February, go down into the news agents in the hotel, and the Asian Wall Street Journal, which is the newspaper of choice, you know, the headline is British Bank Collapses. So genuinely you read it and you think it's somebody else. So you kind of, that's great, somebody's in more trouble than me. And then you read it and you realise it is you. And then you're turning on the TV and it's then images of things going on, the House of Commons and discussions going on about this. And the story starts to build, and there's a bit of a manhunt going on to see where I am. And then eventually pluck up the courage to go to a travel agent and book a flight. The only flight we could book was back to Frankfurt. So going up to passport control, leaving Malaysia, never expected to get out. You know, you're walking out towards the boarding gate and there's a TV above all of the boarding gates and it's your picture on all of those. Interpol looking for you. And then somehow you manage to get onto the flight, and then they hand out newspapers on the flight. You know, and if it's an Italian newspaper or a French newspaper or an English newspaper, your picture's on the front page of all of these. So you're trying to remain incognito. You've got a baseball cap on the top of your head. You know, you're pulling your blanket up over your face as much as you can.
What's going through you emotionally?
I don't know. I don't know if you're numb by that stage, but it's just pure panic and an adrenaline that's keeping you going, and the focus is on getting back to Frankfurt and then seeing what you do from there. There's no plan, right? When I get back to Frankfurt, what am I going to do? You know, it's not like we had a load of money on us or anything like that. You know, from Frankfurt, it would have been easier to get back to the UK and then, you know, start to deal with the situation there. So when we arrived in Frankfurt, the police were there ready waiting for us. We were arrested on the basis that we were travelling on false passports, which is rubbish because I wouldn't know how to get a false passport.
How did it feel when you got arrested?
Again, you know, like it would be easy for me to give you, you know, a cliched answer and say it was a massive relief. No, it wasn't. You're being arrested in Germany by some stern-looking German border police. Singaporeans changed the charge from travelling on a false passport to letting my wife go. My wife at the time letting her go, and then my charges changed to cheating. And then I was put into prison in a place called Höchst, which is just outside of Frankfurt. It's a medium security prison. So I was placed in there, and I served about 8 months in prison in Höchst before I was extradited back to Singapore.
And when you were extradited to Singapore, what were you eventually charged with, and how long did you get?
So I was charged with 11 charges of cheating and 1 charge of forgery. It was a specimen charge by the time that I was prosecuted. So it was 1 charge of cheating, which carried a maximum of 7 years, and then 1 charge of forgery, which carried a maximum of 1 year. So the total that I went back to face was a total of 8 years.
Could you have been charged for each account?
Yeah, and that was the speculation. So between, you know, March of 95 and probably July, August of 95, the speculation in the red top media was that I was going to get 84 years in prison. So eventually we start to negotiate with the Singaporeans, and my lawyers agreed, you know, a maximum of 8 years. They agreed that I would pay £250,000 against police costs. They agreed that I would make a public apology to the Singaporean people. And that's what we agreed to. So the maximum that I was facing when I went back was 8 years. And I thought I could do that. You know, I was probably basing that off the fact that I'd just done 8 months in Germany with a TV and a Game Boy and, you know, spending a lot of time out of the cell. It wasn't like that in Singapore, so I wasn't comparing like with like when I was thinking about that.
What is Singaporean prison like?
Well, I stayed in a maximum security prison, so they have Gurkhas on the walls with guns. Mine was a new prison. It was a place called Tanah Merah. It's a prison that houses the gangsters in Singapore. So for those of you who visited Singapore, it's lovely and it's very clean and everything's very modern and whatever else. But if you go out into where the locals live, there are gangs that run some of those areas. So you have the 14K Triad gang, you have Ang Soon Tong, you have a Malay gang called Amiga, there's Indian gangs, and sometimes these gangs clash. And when they clash, they're super violent, and usually there's a death or two. And these gangs continue to clash in prison.
So you're in circulation with these gangsters, is that right?
Yeah, I was in the same wing with the gangsters. So the foreigners were in that wing as well. So, you know, like I had a Nepali inmate who was convicted of some sort of drug deal when he was in Singapore. And I think one of the things probably that worked in my favour is that everybody thought I was this uber criminal that had stolen 2.2 billion Singapore dollars. So it elevated me to a level, because it's triad gangs, you have different levels within that. So I was probably one of the senior levels within the prison. So I didn't do anything to sort of deny that's what happened, because it enabled me to survive, and surviving was the most important part. But it was very clean. You sleep on the floor's very rough and uneven. You know, it's very hot. You wake up in the morning, it's 100 degrees. Heat rises during the day, so it's even hotter at night. But it just adds to the pressure and the difficulty all of the time. So I would always, there's 3 people to a cell 6 foot by 9 foot. There's a small area for you to go to the toilet. at the end of that, which is also where you shower. The toilet and the shower are the same place. On one occasion, I had two cellmates who were both Malay, but they were from different gangs, but they got on because they used to pray. And then they took those out of the cell, and there hadn't been any violence. And I refused to go back into the cell at that point because I said they've got on. So they put me in the punishment cells for refusing to go back into the cell.
What's the punishment cell?
Punishment cells, you're locked up on your own. There's no windows. There's no ventilated areas. They turn the light on at night. They turn it off during the day. So there's a bit of sensory deprivation. The cells are dirty. They don't get cleaned, and you have a cat flap in the door that they put the food through, so you don't see anybody. And if it's a major offence, you stay there for 7 days. That would be the punishment, and then they add 7 days onto your sentence. And if it's a minor offence, you stay there for 3 days, and they add 3 days onto your sentence. I stayed there for 31 days because they didn't want to adjudicate on it. Everybody knew what day I was being released, and they didn't want to change that. And if they'd sentenced me, they would have had to do that. So,
what does that do to you psychologically?
It's tough. So I used to walk up and down a lot, and eventually you work out if you walk up and down. So it's 6 foot by 9, no difference in the size of the cell. And if you walk up and down slowly 750 times, that's an hour, and that's how you pass the time. There is no other way to pass the time. You have no books, you have no nothing. You know that you get fed roughly around 8 o'clock in the morning with your breakfast, and then you get your lunch around 12, and maybe you get your afternoon meal about 3 or 4. So that's the only way you can break it up. And then after 31 days, they just came and they said, you've got to leave. So I went back to the general area. I'd lost a lot of weight and was getting a lot of pain and discomfort in my stomach. So eventually they sent me out to an external prison, and in the A&E area, a genuine doctor came down and he felt a lump in my stomach and immediately warded me for investigations. I had a colonoscopy, I had an endoscopy and various other things, I suppose. And then you kind of wake up in a bit of a blur, and you kind of see some pictures on the screen, and you're being told that it's colon cancer. So not delivered in the most in the most polite or proper way. Then one morning, after the diagnosis and everything, I put my hand up to go to the toilet very early in the morning. It was very close to National Day in Singapore, so there wasn't a lot of staff in the hospital generally. So I go to the toilet, and they find me collapsed around the toilet bowl because the tumour, which was 7 by 10 centimetres at that time, that's pushed up into, pushing everything up onto my lung. So they do a few x-rays, and then, maybe 3 or 4 hours later, I'm having an emergency operation to remove a third of my colon. Wake up, 38 staples in my stomach, fairly high on morphine, a few prison-type guests who were coming through to make sure that I was still alive so they could report that to the media. And then a few days later, I'm sent back to prison, into the general prison.
What do you see when you look back at yourself in that position?
It's a good question. I look back to my time in Singapore, and I was 25 when I first moved there to run the operation, and 28, I'm starting a prison sentence. I definitely didn't have the management skills that I needed to deal with the situation that I was in. So it was all, I was in a rush, I wanted success. And the problem is, I think, I wasn't thinking about how my actions were going to impact on other people. How they were going to impact on the people that worked with me, that I worked for. I'll always be remembered for the opposite of what I was trying to achieve. So, but I see how some of the pressure and the situations that I put myself in led to an awful lot of bad decision making. So I think, my key message as I talk to people around the globe is to always ask for help and advice. The quicker you act, the better the situation will be. These are all the opposite of what I did.
what's changed in your perspective of failure?
I'm not scared of it. I think is the key thing. You know, like failure is going to happen, right? And I think if you're as scared of it as I was in those days, it will lead you to making bad decisions. So there is always a path through everything that you're facing, and sharing that with other people and communicating, I think, is a key part of that.
On the first day, this guy sent me to buy lunch. And I came back and I'd bought lunch for like 4 people, and I give them their lunch, and then I give the guy back his change. And I'd recorded exactly how much his change was going to be. So his change is something like, I don't know, £12.74, and I put it on the desk, it's £12.74. He looks at it, he's like, what's that? And I said, it's your change. And he didn't say anything. So just wait, I was like, it's £12.74. And he doesn't say anything, he just slides the money along his desk into the drawer. And then he looks at me. He looked at me like he was going to kill me. And he said, on this desk, we keep the change.